Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. You know, about a year ago, I taped a show called The Voice Behind the Microphone and had a lot of fun talking with and getting to know better Rich Girard, who is sitting here to my right, who has a Monday through Friday show on WLMW 90.7 FM from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And let me tell you
No,
something.
9 a.m.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
9
no,
a.m.
15
Good thing
hours
you're
on the
sitting
air.
here.
No, see that? 15 hours on the
That'd be too much.
You know, I actually did that one day.
You did?
I did it on primary day. New Hampshire primary day, 15 hours
Oh,
of
I wish
live
I had
radio.
heard the last couple hours. Those had to be even crazier than usual.
They were fun. They were good, though. They were good.
Well, let me tell you, if you're like me in the morning, you know, I'm not one of those jump up and face the day fast person. But if you're like me, trust me, his show is guaranteed to wake you up and get you going.
Oh, my head.
Yeah, there you go. And it is never dull when he's around. He's back today. We don't really have a script to follow, so there's just no telling where we're going to go on this. Now, before we get going, I want to tell you a little bit about Rich. He's a very highly respected public figure and an opinion maker throughout southern New Hampshire. He's a Manchester native and still resides in the city with his wife, Jennifer, and believe it or not, they have 5 little kids. After graduating magna cum laude from Manchester West High School in 1987, he went on to earn his degree in political science in 1991 from Boston College. But while he was still in high school in '86, he also graduated from the St. Paul's School Advanced Studies program, where he studied law and government. Now, Rich is noted for his knowledge of local and state politics, and himself, he's been very deeply involved. He was the executive assistant to the well-known and longtime Manchester Mayor, Ray Wazorek.
I was 6 feet tall when I started with him.
Well, he oversaw the daily operations of the mayor's office and the city. I don't know, maybe that's a scary thought, I'm not sure. Overhauled the city's $165 million operating budget and restructured city efforts to track New Hampshire state legislation. In '97, he was the first person elected to the newly created position of Alderman at Large in Manchester. And in that, he made a big mark with his ideas on such things as reforms to city government, spending reductions, tax reductions, and even economic development. In 2001, he was a challenger to Manchester Mayor Robert Bain's first re-election effort. And he put together a grassroots effort that was unprecedented in Manchester, and I don't think has been duplicated since.
We had 1,000 signs on people's front lawns.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And not only...
And if they could have voted, I would have won. Not so much.
That also benefited a whole bunch of other candidates that year who were seeking other Manchester offices. In 2012, he was in a citywide election to the city's new charter commission, which is currently working on and reviewing and revising the city's constitution. Now, on the business side of life, Rich also has a broad background and a record of success. He started and owned Girard Marketing LLC, a successful marketing consulting and services brokerage firm. And then in 1992, through that, he started working with a national financial services firm to work with both families and businesses on insurance, investment, debt, and other financial needs. And since 2004, he's actually been a regional vice president with that national firm. He also has an impressive media background. He's been a regular columnist with both the Manchester Express and Hippo Press, was a regular commentator on the Charlie Sherman Show, who you all know Charlie Sherman, and now in addition to his own Girard at Large daily show on, again, WLMW 90.7 FM, he has a weekly public affairs show on Manchester Public Television, and that also has a very large audience. Now, somehow, I should say, in the middle of all this, he still made time for huge involvement in community service, and he's organized numerous community events, served as a committee member, board member, trustee for several area social, nonprofit, athletic, and even ethnic heritage organizations, and he's also very active in St. Mary's Parish in Manchester's West Side. Now, let me say this.
I'd like to take a nap. I'm tired now.
There you go.
Thank you for that overly gracious
Well,
introduction.
I have to say this. It would not be a show with Rich Girard if I did not ask you to right now say what you say every morning when you open your show. Go for it.
Good morning, Manchester, and to those of you in the surrounding towns, this is Girard at Large, and I'm your slightly embarrassed and overwhelmed host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in.
And that's what gets people up in the morning, especially some people.
I try to come up with a different series of adjectives before host.
Yeah.
And when I fail to do that, I'm just your ever humble host, Rich Girard. Thanks.
Yes,
for
I've heard you do the ever humble a lot.
Yes.
You know, I've been over to his studio when they're broadcasting, and it is a funny place.
It's the green. It's the splashes of green paint all over our walls, Kathy.
Well, you know, and DJ Dave
Brightens it
certainly keeps it pretty lively.
You know, he is a genius with the music. The bumpers
Unbelievable.
in and the bumpers out. He finds a way to take what we're talking about
I know.
and turn it into music.
I know.
And he is lethally funny, and he's
Yes.
99.44, 100% on point.
Yes.
And
Yeah, he always
he's
hits
very
it.
good. Yep.
And I know the times when I've been there to talk with you. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. You no sooner get done the sentence and up comes this music. I mean, he must have just an incredible knowledge of music.
Well, you know, he is a professional DJ.
I know he
and,
is, yeah.
I've seen him at parties and weddings.
Oh,
and
he
all
must
kinds
be
of-
a hoot.
He is. He's got a very good ability to sort of read the crowd and know where to go
Yeah,
with it.
yeah.
And I've been to a lot of different events, and he's one of those unique DJs that can actually let it be about the crowd in the event and not have to be center stage.
Yeah. You can see that even on your show too.
Yeah, he's
and
very
I
good.
mean, he is funny. He's a funny guy. So I would imagine that the parties must really get to be hilarious before they're finished.
If that's what it calls for, that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You got a good crew over there.
Well, thank you. They work hard, and
They do. Well, radio's so fast-paced, and I mean, you have to be so on mark. I mean, you can't be
Yes.
like me just yabbering away without paying attention to the clock. I mean, when
true.
you have to go to a commercial break or whatever, bang, you have to do it.
And it's a good thing I've got some good folks around me, because they often cue me about when I'm supposed to tone it down, shut up, and move on, because the sponsor break is coming.
Oh, I would drive them crazy, wouldn't I?
I'm sure you'd confirm.
Excuse
Conformity
me. Well, we
not
have to
being in our
hope so.
normal nature, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
I know, but you do keep it lively. There's no question about that.
Well, you know, it's a morning show, and it's as much to keep myself awake as anything, because I'll tell you, I am the furthest thing that you will find from a morning person, but somehow I've adapted to getting up at 3:30, 4:45, so I can be to the studio for 4:30, 4:45, and get the news ready and do all the things that we do.
And
before
even
the
though
show.
that sometimes with people like me at midnight and 1 a.m. we're exchanging emails.
Yeah, sleep is optional. I figure I can get some of that when I'm dead.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it too. Yeah,
Well, let's hope
because
it
my
doesn't
husband will
happen
say to
anytime
me, "What's
soon."
wrong with you? Why don't you go to bed?" And I'll go, "Why?"
There's too much to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's never enough hours in the day. You just, you push on ahead and have a good time. And although I've been known, I mean, I'm pretty bad. I have been known, like if I'm somewhere, and I mean, it doesn't even have to be listening to somebody make a speech. I mean, I could be at a movie theater or watching a live show and take a shot nap.
Doze off. Yeah, that's been known to happen to me from time to time. If I don't keep moving, I will fall asleep.
Now, does your wife give you one of these like Jerry does to me?
No, she leaves me alone.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I've been told I embarrassed him a couple of times.
Well, I suppose if I threw my head back and I was drooling on myself and snoring, she might be embarrassed enough to do it. But usually she just lets me
Well,
be.
I guess I've snored a couple of times.
I've been known in my home office to doze off doing something with the
Yeah.
email.
Oh, yeah. Isn't it awful?
Well, you
And
gotta
then you
do.
wake up and you're kind of like, now, what was I saying?
I've gotten smart though. When that happens, I take myself to bed for a
Do ya?
20-minute nap. Yeah, I can basically hit a power nap and be reset for the next 8 hours.
See, I'm the opposite, because if I doze off, then I wake up and I'm wired. I'm good for another hour or two. I mean, it's ridiculous. People will say to me, "Did you really send me that email at 3:15?" I'll go, "Yeah."
Oh, you think I scheduled it for mid-morning delivery? No, not so much. That would take technical skills that I don't currently have. But anyway.
And I would definitely not have, because I'm definitely not a computer whiz kid, Not
Indeed.
by a long shot. Well, Well, I'm going to throw, and I haven't told you a couple of questions.
You haven't told me any questions,
I
which
know.
it's got me a little nervous, actually.
Oh, I know. These will be fun ones. And I have a feeling you won't have any trouble coming up with the answers to any of them either.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Who do you think? I mean, you get to meet them all, and if you don't get to meet them all, you certainly get to learn about them all
Yep.
and follow them all. Who do you think's the most fascinating person today in New Hampshire politics? And that can be fascinating for any reason, good, bad, whatever.
The most fascinating person in New Hampshire
I mean, because we do have
politics.
some characters.
Wasn't exactly expecting that. The most fascinating person in New Hampshire politics.
Yeah.
You mean outside of myself, of course.
Well, we know you're number one.
You know, it's the most fascinating person in New Hampshire politics. At this point, I would have to say the most fascinating person, at least to me in New Hampshire politics, is probably Senator Jean Shaheen.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Well, she's up for re-election in 2 years,
Yeah.
and it's an off-year election.
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch her try to split issues, like, for example, the gun rights issues,
Yeah.
and keep feet in two different camps.
Yeah, she does do that.
She's got the least cash on hand at the moment of any senator that is up for re-election in 2010.
Is that right?
Some think she's vulnerable. Some think she is not vulnerable. It's going to be interesting to see who decides to step up and challenge her.
Yeah. Because I hear she is definitely going to have challenges this trip.
Of course she
Yeah.
will. I mean, the Republicans aren't going to let that seat go. So it's going to be interesting to see how she postures herself over the next couple of years with a coming re-election bid, where I don't think she's naive enough to take a look at the last election and read anything more into it than what was there. I mean, Obama carried the state, Maggie Hassan carried the state.
Yeah.
But I don't know that she's feeling her oats, so to speak. I think she's probably taken a couple of lessons. And I think Mandy Grumwald is her name, is typically who, or is it Mary Ann Marsh? It's one of the two, but both of them are pretty vicious political operatives.
And those are part of her staff?
They've been on her campaigns in the past.
Oh, yeah?
So I think that she's probably the most interesting politician in the state right now, not so much because of her, but because of the circumstance that she's in, facing re-election with a likely substantial Republican challenge and national attention. It'll be interesting to see how she parses the issues, splits the baby, so to speak, on a number of them, how she defends the wildly unpopular Obamacare, among other things. And we're going to, by the time she's up for re-election, we're going to start seeing the outfalls and impacts of Obamacare, because it's, the hooks are sinking.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple other issues. So I think she's probably the most interesting one to watch because of the circumstance that she's in. That would be my opinion.
That's interesting. All right. Now, here's one. Sort of on the same vein, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Who do you think's the worst one we've got running around loose right now?
Oh. Well, I think
Did we stump Rich Girard momentarily or what?
I think it's a tie between our state's two congresspeople, between Annie Custer not paying her property taxes and Carol Shea Porter just in her continued shameless advocacy of the idea that there's just absolutely nothing in the federal government that can be cut. I find them both to be uninteresting, predictable. I've reached out to both of them. I mean, I used to have Charlie Bass and Frank Ginta as regulars on the show. Yeah. I've reached out to both of their offices. I got a form letter from Annie Custer on official-looking letterhead that basically said, "Thanks for your inquiry. I don't have the opportunity to answer all my emails, but we'll do our best," even though I went to the place on our website that said, invitations to speak.
Yeah.
I find it hard to believe that the 2nd District congressperson has got so many invitations to speak that I need the form letter. And Carol Shea Porter's people just flat out came out and said the congressman is uninterested in being a guest on your show, even though they continue to send me.
Were you mean to her one time or something?
Oh, well, there's a story there. But and I, listen, I am a conservative, but I think that people will tell you, if they listen to the show, that I give fair airing. I probably go out of my way to be fair to people that I don't agree with.
Oh, I know you do.
Because
Yeah.
I don't want to set people, I don't want to be accused of setting anybody up for an ambush. That doesn't mean they go without being challenged.
No, exactly.
That
But
doesn't
there's a
mean-
difference between a challenge and an ambush.
That's right. And there are people like Lee Nyquist, who has been a guest on the show, who speaks very highly of the show, and I'm you know, grateful for that. You know, clearly there's not a whole lot of common area between Lee and I, but he thought he got a fair hearing on the issues. He thought the debate I moderated with now Senator Sanborn was fair. And but Carol Shea Porter, not interested in coming on the Girard at Large show, so but they never stopped sending me all of their press material, some of which I use and some of which I don't. It all depends on how the spirit moves me.
Well, they don't even answer my emails.
Well, listen, I thought you were more than fair in the interview, and if
I thought I was too.
Carol Shea Porter didn't like it, it's because the topics you chose to discuss were topics that were not favorable to her election campaign. And I'll tell you
Even
what.
though they were topics that she had a record on
Oh, absolutely.
while she was there.
Well, listen,
but she didn't want me talking about what was they called old.
You know, listen, I think one of the unique things that I bring to the radio show is the fact that I have been appointed political staff. I have been a candidate for political office. I have been an elected official, and now I'm a media personality. So I have been on the receiving end of what I give. And I am not the kind of person who says turnabout is fair play. I remember what it was to read the newspaper the following morning and wonder whether or not I was at the same meeting that the reporter was at.
And that
so
happens.
I go out of my way to get it right and to make sure people get a fair airing of their grievance. It's like the whole international baccalaureate thing here in Bedford. Now, people who tune into the show will think that I am anti-IB, and I would be lying if I said I didn't have concerns about it. But your superintendent was invited to appear on my show, didn't respond. Every member of your school board was invited to appear on my show. Only one responded, and that person responded saying that it wouldn't be right for him to air his position because it was in disagreement with the board, and it wouldn't. He didn't, for whatever reason, didn't feel it would be appropriate for him as an individual member who's opposed to the policy to air his grievance, given that the board had, sort of like the precursor to the behavior manifesto that you and I talked about.
Yeah, I don't get that, because I mean, if you have an opinion, you know,
That's right.
it's not criminal to say I don't happen to agree with
Well,
the
I
rest
said to
of
this
you
fellow,
on
I said,
this.
well, how are you going to change people's minds if
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
argue the point?
Yeah.
Anyway, he was the only one of your school board to respond. The only other person to respond, I invited your high school principal, because he's an IB proponent, and he politely declined to be a guest on the show. I reached out to the IB people, the pro-IB people, to invite them to the show, because my show is not so much about advancing an agenda as it is about creating the community dialogue. That whole IB thing that we covered on the show, which was rather extensive,
I know.
it found me. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't pick up the phone and call this one and that one and this one. I didn't know House Bill 1403 existed until somebody dropped it on my adorable little head, as we say on my adorable little show. Oh, my head. But I think that in the furtherance of public discussion and dialogue, I will give anybody the opportunity to come share their point of view, especially if I think they're giving themselves enough hope to hang themselves, and I don't have to be the newsman.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's nothing wrong with asking a challenging question.
Or calling you-know-what on something that's just flat out wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't...
And I don't call that an attack. I truly do not.
Right. So if Carol Shea Porter were to accept our request, our invitation to be a guest on the show, could she expect some tough questions about her positions? She could. But could she also expect a fair opportunity to tell us her side of the story and what she's doing for us or to us down in Washington? Yeah, but that's okay. And anybody who follows the show knows that's the case. So, but to answer your question, I think probably Annie Custer with her, and you know the thing that really got me about Annie Custer was, I have 2 kids, life is expensive, and she went on in the statement, and I really, I have 5 kids and life is expensive. I'm thinking if I had the second home and life were that busy and that expensive that I couldn't pay my taxes, I'd sell the second home.
Well, yeah.
And get caught up with things. But so the father of 5 who doesn't have $2 million in assets lying around, who pays his property taxes on time, never missed a payment, probably wasn't the guy to receive that message. So I think probably the least interesting of the 2.
Well, it took her quite a while to make any response to all
Well, I'll give her credit. At least she didn't try to come up with some
Well,
poppycock.
yeah, yeah.
Who
But I
knows?
mean, I think we should expect a little more. I mean, if you're going to run
Well,
for
now we know
public office,
now we know why she wants an income tax. They could just deduct it from her paycheck. She doesn't have to worry about cutting out the check to the government. Anyway,
well, it is kind of intriguing. I did tell you, I think, I'm sure I did, that Carol Shea Porter, they said they graciously offered me a redo of the show if I dumped the first show.
yes.
But with the caveat that I would supply her with the questions
ahead
in
of time,
advance
yeah.
that she had to approve. Otherwise, it was a no-go.
Listen, having been
mean,
the
give me a break.
Right. Well, having been the elected official and walked into places where angels fear to tread.
Yeah.
Also, my former boss was not above sending me to places he knew he was in for a rough ride to go. So
Yeah,
there are a lot of bullet holes here. I have no sympathy for any public official who wants to control the questions, the media, or the agenda. I walked
don't
into any hearing, any interview, any meeting, any group with whether you like me or not, you agree with me or not, you have the right to ask me questions. I am running for public office, or I am a public official, and I have a responsibility, obligation, an ethical duty to answer your questions, whether you're going to like the answer or not. And so my perspective as a media figure is to expect that the questions I ask will be answered because I was always willing to answer them. I never told anybody, I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about that. Interesting, the only other politician that I really have some broad experience with that on is Ted Gatzis, who is a weekly guest on my show. Your Honor, is there anything you want to talk about, you want to not talk about? Nope, whatever you want to ask me is on the agenda.
He is totally open to anything.
So, where others are somewhat concerned about, hey, can we make sure we talk about this and talk about that? Which there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
I will
if there's a
give them
burning issue, and they
I'll
want
give
to
them the
talk about,
opportunity to address something, but not at the expense of my being able to avoid
Right,
something.
right. Yeah, I mean, some of them want to script the whole show, and
Oh, yes.
you obviously have to say,
Well, I don't even script myself, so no one's going to come in and script my show.
Exactly. Let me ask you something. Who do you think was and I mean, you've had a ton of guests.
I've done 1,700 interviews in about
And that's just
17
on the
months.
radio show.
Yes.
So, and then when you add in the TV show and probably newspaper interviews you did,
Yeah.
who would you say, of course the newspaper is different, but for radio or the television show, who do you think was your best ever guest that really it just clicked and everything, not whether you agreed with what they had to say or not, but just was a fabulous guest?
That's actually really hard.
Yeah?
Because I have done, we've been on the air since September 26, 2011, and we've averaged, although some of them are regular guests, as you know.
Yeah.
But we've averaged somewhere in the ballpark of 25 interviews a week.
I know you do. Yeah.
And there are people who have done, 8 months ago, there was probably someone that I went, wow, but in that 8 months, they've been buried by hundreds of interviews. I'll say the one the more recent one that sticks in my mind as a great interview was Manchester Police Chief Dave Mera.
Yeah.
And,
I can see why he would be.
Well, we've had a lot of what I would consider run-of-the-mill, Tom Brennan, the Manchester superintendent, always a good interview. Mayor Gatzis, always a good interview. But the thing about Mera was he agreed to come on the air and talk to me after the Connecticut tragedy.
Oh.
And he had an interview with me that, frankly, I don't think most police chiefs would have been willing to have with anybody.
Really?
And when it came to the issues of the right and proper role of guns in schools or public spaces and different things that we talked about, he took questions and challenges and was willing to offer responses that I don't think many other in law enforcement at that time would have been able to do. So he was very candid, and he was
excuse me,
very forthcoming about where his position left unanswered questions and potential liabilities. And so that one comes to mind. Dan Doherty, our Manchester Area Person of the Year, the officer that was shot in Manchester, is now back on the job.
Yeah.
That was an
it's
impressive
amazing he's
interview
back.
because he was such an impressive person, and his ability to speak about what happened to him and be that example, I think is in there too. But the one that I did with Dave Mera and a couple of the ones that I've done with Tom Brennan, where he's been very candid about what's wrong with schools in general and what needs to be done to address it, I think rank up there probably as some of the better ones I've recently done. But the one with Mara over the whole Sandy Hook tragedy, I think that comes to mind as the
I
best
don't know
right
him
now.
well, but anytime I've had conversation with him, he's a very straightforward guy. You know, you can tell that he's in a position of command, but yet he's a humble guy. Just very pleasant to
Some
deal
would
with.
disagree with that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't come off as arrogant or
No, he
you know what I
doesn't. But
mean?
he's definitely, I think, convinced about what he sees as the right way to go and the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, but he'd have to be on that kind of job, you know.
He
You
would.
can't be wishy-washy.
But you know what? The thing that I appreciate about David is the same thing I kind of appreciate about Ted Gatzis or Tom Brennan is you can push back on what they say. You can question them. You can challenge them, and they take it as part of the rough and tumble of the public dialogue.
Right.
And
They don't get all offended, and you're their enemy forevermore.
and they'll push back, or I think they take a look at it as an opportunity to either say, "Gee, I hadn't thought about that," or to refine their point and better make their case. And again, it's all in pursuit of the public dialogue. So, yeah.
He has agreed to come on and do a Tell It Like It Is show with me. We're just trying to work out dates because between everything and the move of the police station and everything,
Yeah.
he's been, you know, obviously overscheduled. But I'm looking forward to it because I think he'll be a lot of fun and very interesting.
That's right.
Okay, now I think you knew this was coming after I asked you the best. Who was the worst? That we all remember our worst, don't we?
Yeah, there are two that come to mind. I had a
Now see how fast you were able to answer that?
I know. That's because, and you know what? It's not that they were bad. It's just that they were bad for radio.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that you hope for in a radio interview, and it's not unlike television, is that you ask a question and you get more than a 3 or 4 sentence response.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are tough.
And I don't want to say who it was because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But there were a couple of candidates running for local office during the last round of elected offices where we did about 31 hours of interviews for people running for school board and alderman and mayor and welfare commissioner. We held a bunch of debates, and so we did a lot of coverage. And there were a couple folks running for the ward offices that either gave those 3 or 4 sentence answers, or they were so halting in their speech, or they really had to think about the question that there was dead air, and they were difficult interviews. Both of them, I ended up
And
getting
that's brutal
to
on
the
radio,
first commercial break
especially.
and saying thanks for joining us. But yeah, those two popped to mind.
Yeah. But what about worst in terms of somebody that you don't mind saying their name that just,
I think
I don't know, maybe went crazy or something or reacted ridiculously or whatever?
Well, that would probably be the folks, I forget, you know, Standing for New Hampshire Families, that Republican group that was a gay marriage advocacy group.
Oh, yeah.
I had them on the show, and, you know, when I brought up their arguments and I said, okay, well, now let's take that argument and apply it to polygamy, they totally freaked out on me.
Oh, really?
And it's different. And the funny thing is
that in your archives?
it's in my archives.
Oh, I'll have to listen to that one.
And they did all of the objections that people once upon a time had to gay marriage were the exact same objections, almost word for word, that they were using to talk about polygamy, how it never happened, it's different because, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. And so I had one very simple point. If your argument, the whole issue on gay marriage is really boils down to a consenting adult issue. So if there's nothing magic about a man and a woman in a marriage, what is magic about the number 2? And if lawsuits can be filed over the principle of what consenting adults do should be the business of nobody else, then there's nothing to prevent the number 2 from going to 3 or 4 or 5. And at some point, that argument moves beyond the, you know, what consenting adults can do to who the consenting adult is. We're eventually going to see a discussion about what comprises a consenting adult for the purposes of matrimony and your ability to enter into that agreement. And then there are a whole bunch of, you know, religious freedom questions, because if the government says, you know what, you have a right to marry as a gay person or as a polygamist or whatnot. Well, if you have a right to do that, what happens to the preacher at the pulpit when they preach a traditional biblical view of marriage? That eventually becomes labeled hate speech. If you're a business and you don't, if you're a florist, a DJ, you're a restaurant, and you have moral opposition, a landlord, you have moral opposition to that union, and you do not want to participate in it, what happens to you? Well, you're considered a public use. It's considered discrimination. There was a woman a photographer, I believe in Oklahoma, which hasn't sanctioned this, but she was sued by the gay couple because she refused to do the wedding, and they won because it was considered.
But that would be her right.
No,
I mean,
not
anybody
anymore.
who's in business, you have a right to do business
Well,
with whom you want, don't you?
Unfortunately, that's not the case, especially when you're considered a public use or an accommodation, or the reason why you won't do it is because you have some sort of bias against a certain class of person or people. And so, you know, I don't take a look at it from the vantage point of whether or not two consenting adults can do what they want. I take a look at it and say, all right, if the legal argument applies here, how is it disqualified here or there? And if it's not disqualified, then you can predict the future of the argument. You can predict what's going to happen. And the lawsuits have already been filed in the polygamy cases. We're going to see it. And then if you establish a right here, how does that right interfere with the constitutional right? You know, it used to be that you had the freedom of association, and when the state creates these rights, like the right to privacy, or, you know, the right to marry, or when the state creates these rights, it automatically sets up a paradigm that is fundamentally opposed to an individual's ability to exercise their independent rights or their individual rights under the Constitution. You have freedom of association, but now you're forced to associate. If you're that florist or that photographer, you are forced to associate because government created a right here.
Well, yeah.
You are considered hateful. Your speech is going to be considered a crime because you're preaching something other than what the government said is a protected right. There are priests in Canada who are being arrested for this. So
They're being arrested?
Yes, this is happening. And we need to be careful of that. So I never take and they were, if two people love each other, well, what about this? What about this? And then I, brought the polygamy thing up, and I thought their hair fell out.
Really?
That
terrible. Bad.
Well, and I didn't do it, to kick sand in their face. I did it because, and it's funny. They could not defend the consenting adult argument as why it won't work in polygamy, but they threw up all of the same sort of moral, ethical, societal standard objections that people used to argue the gay marriage question over. So you watch, it's going to happen. So I'd say that's probably the worst interview from a point of view of it just didn't end well and we didn't like each other when it was all done.
You think they'll ever come back on again?
No, probably not.
No.
It's fine with me.
But you're so adorable.
I know. I know. What can you do?
Now you recently spearheaded that whole Manchester Area Person of the Year award.
Yes.
And that rightfully wound up honoring Manchester Police Officer Dan Doherty, which I was delighted to see that.
A genuinely humble guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, phenomenal.
Yeah.
In the course of all that, didn't somehow it turn into like a war, and even that Keene legislator wound up somehow involved in it, the one who made the news so much?
Yeah, the Keene legislator who said that the number one threat to the state of New Hampshire was the Free State movement.
Yes, yeah.
That was a coincidental event, and it got wrapped into what we were doing in Manchester because what ended up happening was law enforcement groups and Free State groups noticed that there was a competition developing between the two. The Free State person, Amanda Bolden, who founded a group called Shire Sharing, has done some great work.
Shire Sharing?
Shire Sharing.
S-H-I-R-E?
Yep.
What's that stand for?
I don't know. I mean, you could go to the archives. She probably told me, but that was 1,500 interviews ago. But she's helped literally hundreds of hungry and homeless people throughout the area through an entirely volunteer effort comprised largely of people in the Free State movement. So she was nominated. Everybody that was nominated by a listener to the show. So she was nominated, and she held a lead, and then all of a sudden, the Doherty, it's like the cops find out that Doherty was nominated, and his numbers started to rise.
Oh, yeah.
Well, one thing led to another, and suddenly we had 44,000 votes cast in that poll.
That many?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the overwhelming majority of the votes came within the last 36 hours.
Wow.
So that thing flew, and literally state and national police and Free State organizations, the Ron Paul
Everybody
Network got
was following
involved, law enforcement got involved.
Must have made everybody's websites all over the place.
Well, and local media, it was the subject of 3 stories, I think, in WMUR, and another 3 in the Union Leader, and even got an editorial reference in the Union Leader.
Yeah.
So I would say that was probably, yeah. So it was happening around the time of that Keene rep, and to the degree that it was a Free State thing with that, person who said the way to stop the Free Staters is to deprive our citizens of the liberties that attract them. Really, you're a legislator and you're admitting you want to deprive us of liberty so that fewer people who want it will come here? Oh, my head. But yeah, 44,000 votes. It took a lot for us to sort it through and weed out the ones that were sort of automated.
Yeah,
and you could, after a while, you saw the patterns in the voting and you could disqualify them. But we had 22,000 unique visitors come to the website.
That's amazing.
And 26,000 visits from those 22,000 visitors, and only 44,000 votes. So, there were an awful lot of individual votes cast in that thing.
Yes.
And, we did the best we could.
Yeah, it was, I mean, that was really something, the whole thing. And it turned into quite a big news event all by itself.
It did, and I have not caught up on my email since. But, and we did run multiple different sorts of formulas to try to screen out, different variables. And we declared Doherty the winner because no matter what variable we factored for, he came out on top in every one of them.
And I'm not surprised.
Right.
Because, people just had so much feeling for the guy and so much support for the guy.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a great interview. It's still, I think, on our homepage. We have that one, video and audio. And we were able to give him a nice commemorative piece thanks to Harris Trophy, located in downtown Manchester. John McGranahan did us right there. So if you're looking for a place with a conscience, I would gladly recommend Harris Trophy.
Yeah, that was nice.
So yeah, a genuine, humble, inspirational guy. I was fascinated throughout the interview by how he presented what happened. I can only tell you I probably wouldn't have handled it as graciously, and that's why he was nominated. He was nominated because of how he handled getting shot, the aftermath, the recovery, his mindset, his focus, by the person who nominated him, not because he got shot.
It's a miracle he survived,
That's
really.
Right.
What did he take, 7 bullets?
Yeah, and it was a miracle that he survived. So God's got plans for that boy.
Well, and I'm just glad that the perpetrator has been to court and was put away.
Doherty's only 26.
I know, young guy. And I mean, no matter what, he'll have physical repercussions of that lifelong, really. I mean, I'm sure he'll recover, but you don't go through something like that without some little semblance left behind,
He seems to think it's only going to be the physical, visible scars that he's going to he'll be back to 100%.
Wow.
The only thing I really noticed on him was a bit of a limp, and it was a noticeable limp, but he's back on duty.
I know.
I assume he's on what we call light duty. I don't think he's back in a cruiser.
I would hope so.
But that was a great interview too.
Kind of in all that, the Free Staters came up, and as you remember, the past election, we had Frank Szabo running for sheriff.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, in fact, at the end of my interview with him on the Tell It Like It Is series on candidates, I said to him that I had to admit, and I didn't mean it to be insulting, I just said to him, I have to admit that this is the most unique show I've ever done. And when it came out of my mouth, I wasn't sure if he'd be insulted, and his reaction was he was beaming and very happy, and I guess he sent it out all over the place. And somebody at some point contacted me during the campaign and said that he was using it, and I searched everywhere to see if he had excerpted that to put on a campaign piece or whatever, because I clearly would have complained, because I certainly wasn't endorsing him. But in any event, he certainly was different. You
interviewed him
too. Yes, yeah. He was different. And he's gone now, huh? Where is he? Peru or someplace?
I believe he's in Chile.
Oh, okay.
Yes, wow. I believe he's in Chile.
Wow.
Frank had a unique perspective, but I don't think it was a perspective that really differed much from the Free State movement in general. New Hampshire and the United States, frankly, would probably do well to pay attention to the message of the Free Staters and the Tea Party in general. I don't necessarily see the two as connected, but there are certain similarities, because they're bringing a message, whether you agree with it or not, about the size and scope in government. And there is a legitimate discussion that needs to take place in the state of New Hampshire, and I've interviewed a number of Adamo Freeman, and there needs to be a discussion in this state and in this country about the right and proper size of government, and really how much of government has taken away responsibility from, and therefore the capabilities of the people to make some basic decisions on their own. Like, do I want to go to a barber that doesn't have a piece of paper from the state of New Hampshire saying they're licensed to cut my hair? What's that all about?
Yeah.
Well, it's there to protect your, no, it's actually really there to protect them from additional competition. If I really think that a lot in the state, take the barbers, it's just because I brought it up. What prevents them from forming their own sort of barbers association that says, that conveys, that says you can be a member if, and if you are, we'll give you a sticker for your window that says you meet our standards and you're a member of our association. Now, to me, as a private citizen, I would probably rather go to something there. They have a self-regulating organization, the barbers making sure that their high standards are being met. Who knows, maybe you'd see rival barber organizations evolve, and maybe it'd be people like, it's a sticker, who cares? Why do I need the government involved in prescribing the process that someone who wants to cut hair in exchange for money goes through in order to be okay, licensed or otherwise able to do it? I think there is a legitimate discussion to be had about the size and scope of government and what people should be responsible for and what government should and shouldn't be responsible for.
Yeah, good point.
So I think there's a discussion there, and I think people who treat them with disdain are probably afraid that that discussion might lead to the development of a following. Nothing is suppressed by, nothing is advanced. No cause is permanently or strongly advanced by depriving people of the opportunity to have the dialogue. Engage the battle, prove your point, win your adherence, vote on election day, and live with the benefits or consequences of the decision of the people. That is what is missing, I think, in the public dialogue. And that's one of the things that I really work hard at trying to bring to the fore on my show. I've had more people that I disagree with than I have had that I agree with. I want the dialogue.
Yeah, no, I agree. And for that reason, people like you and people like me are sometimes termed as troublemakers by people who don't want to have the dialogue. I still have a bunch of questions, but I'm trying to be very conscious of the time. And, before we close, I definitely want to allow you to talk about the impact your show, the radio show, has had.
Could be a bug on the windshield.
But I'm going to throw a couple more questions at you.
I'd like to think I'm the meteorite that hit Russia. Boom. Maybe not.
Well, you're sort of the meteorite that hit southern New Hampshire.
No, I'm the media-rite.
Oh,
there you go, huh?
Oh, clever. That better be a new kind of slogan for the show,
Oh, my head.
I'm going to throw a little local something at you.
Okay.
Because I'm sure you have an opinion. As you probably know, we have a town election coming up.
Yes.
And we have 2 council seat openings.
Okay.
And there are only 2 people running for both seats, so obviously
they're
they're both
guaranteed
going
to
to be
win.
elected, no matter how many votes they get.
Yeah.
Now, one is somebody running for re-election, Jim Scanlon, and the other one, I don't know if she pronounces her name Kaylee or Kelly, or the spelling is such that I don't know how she pronounces it, but Murphy.
Well, we always pronounced it Kelly, but I think at some point she went to Kelly.
Oh, is that what it
I'm
is?
not entirely sure, but I would call her Kelly.
Okay.
Because I've known her since she was this hot.
Oh, you have?
Well, her mother's a former alderman in Manchester, and when I was working for, and a former school board member, and I was working for the mayor. One of the terms she served was during my time in the mayor's office. So I go back quite a ways. I go back to 1991 with that family. Yes.
Oh, well, then you're
Know the
definitely going to
family.
have an opinion. Well, she's been in Bedford for the past couple of years. They moved here from Manchester,
Yes.
and almost as soon as they moved here, her husband, who also owns Murphy's Tap on Elm Street, ran for state rep. And as a Republican, was pretty much guaranteed he'd be elected because Republicans do very well in the state rep races in Bedford, and he was elected. So he's in his second term, so that means they've been here for at least a couple of years. So this year, she decided that she would run also, because
For state rep.
obviously, because obviously we were going to have a couple of openings. Moran decided not to seek re-election, and of course Ken Hawkins decided to take a shot at being Senate. Well, anyway, I mean, she came in as a brand new legislator in January, and as we all know, state legislators are kind of busy.
They do take time. Yep.
Yes, you know, and they have things to learn. I mean, there's a lot you have to learn as a new state legislator.
Yep.
Get your feet wet and so
Well,
on.
her mother was a state rep from Manchester's
Oh,
Ward
she
8
was?
on multiple occasions, so maybe she learned the ropes from that.
You think? Well, in any event, she...
See, it's not uncommon, by the way, in Manchester to have aldermen and/or school board members also be state reps or state
Well,
senators.
yeah, well, that's kind of where I'm going with this. Because she no sooner, you know, starts her new job as a state rep, which she got elected to in Bedford, and obviously has a business, and somebody told me she's a lawyer. I don't know if she's practicing or not.
Last I knew, she was, but I don't know. I think that was before she started having kids. So I'm
Yeah,
not
and
sure
she
if
does
she's
have
continued in
two
that.
very young
got
children,
two
because
little
I
ones.
saw her with an infant, you know, not that long ago.
Yeah.
Well, now all of a sudden she throws herself into the town council race for basically a guaranteed job. And I mean, I do know that, you know, anybody who runs for Bedford Town Council has to put in a whole lot of hours between council meetings, learning the issues, the committee meetings,
You got to make
they
sure
all
that you
have
don't
to
say
serve
anything
as
offensive.
liaison to different boards and commissions
You got
in
to
the
make sure
town.
now you don't say anything offensive, so you have the naughty letter written about you.
Oh, I don't care if I get a naughty letter. I could kill us.
No,
you
I'm
know?
talking about the people on the board.
Oh. Well, in any event, I kind of like don't want somebody as a council member who I think should be doing her job as a state rep because she wanted that so badly. I don't think people should hold two public offices at the same time. I'm just kind of wondering what your sense of an issue like that is.
You know, as the father of 5 with a wife who stayed home, I'm particularly sensitive to what happens with the kids, particularly at a young age.
Oh, well,
because
we're both going to get in trouble for that.
I
You
know.
know that. There's going to be some women's groups
well-
who'll damn both of us.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah, I
mean,
know. I know.
But you know that's my first thought because you know I'm a family kind of guy.
Yeah.
You know, God first, family second,
Yeah.
business, politics, all
Yeah,
that comes.
but on the practical side of
after
things,
that.
there's still 24 hours in every one of our days.
Right, and so you know I would be concerned for you know their family about their ability to manage their affairs.
Yeah.
If they think they can do it, fine. But here's what I have to say about Kelly Domain. I'll be Kelly Murphy, formerly Kelly Domain. When she left Manchester, she left a very bad taste in my mouth.
Well, didn't she hold office and resign
She
or
was
something?
she was a school board member in Manchester. I'm not surprised she's running because she is an opportunist. She's an opportunist. She sees an opening and she runs for it. She saw an opening in Manchester, ran for the school board, ran against an incumbent, B.J. Perry, but an ailing incumbent. So there was an opportunity there. And then there was the opportunity to run against someone who had held the office before, Alderman Hirschman. Also, so she went from one term on the school board to a term on the Board of Aldermen, and then she left. And when she left,
She resigned.
she resigned. She did
Before her
not serve.
term was
She
up.
did not serve out the term. She resigned. And the thing now, she represented the ward of the city, Ward 12, which is the northwest corner of the city, that I grew up in. So when she announced that she was leaving because the neighborhood, I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I don't remember exactly what she said, although I was writing for the Manchester Express at the time and I had some very direct things to say about it, that the neighborhood didn't have housing or schools suitable for her as she was thinking about starting a family. You know,
But she's representing that neighborhood.
I took that as a slap. Now, if she had come out and said, you know what, never in my wildest dreams did I expect to be living outside the city of Manchester, especially since I was elected by the people, but our realtor said, you just got to look, and we did, and she was right, we fell in love with the place, you can give that a pass. But to kick the people who elected her twice to office in the teeth on the way out with such a level of, you're beneath me, which just might fit in this town, but you're beneath me. And your neighborhoods aren't good enough, your schools aren't good enough, and so I'm going to go to greener pastures, I think shows a level of immaturity and or selfishness that is not well suited to public office. Now, perhaps she's learned from that mistake and she's matured a bit and she's grown up, but it bothers me not only as a public official in Manchester, but as a kid who grew up on that side of town and knows that those neighborhoods are plenty good for people like Kelly Murphy. it bothered me on a number of levels, not the least of which is, gee, if you really think that Manchester needs some change in its schools, why didn't you stay on the school board? Why did you instead run for an open seat?
One would assume that's why she wanted to be on the school board. Why,
you're right. Why didn't you stay on the school board and fight for the changes you thought needed to be fought? Or why didn't you stay as a member of the Board of Aldermen and fight for the changes you thought needed to be fought for? So I think when push comes to shove and things may be going to get difficult, she might take off. There might be another opportunity that presents itself that she might want to take advantage of. I hope she's kind of grown beyond that and matured beyond that. I don't know, but taking a look at the political pattern that I've seen from her in the past, you know, if Manchester schools were that big a priority, maybe you should have stayed on the school board. If you thought there were things in the city that needed to change to help improve the neighborhoods, maybe you should have stayed in the office that you were entrusted with and fought to make those changes, instead of kicking the people who twice put you in office in the head on the way out the door, to let them know, just in case they weren't sure, that where you live isn't good enough for me.
Right.
Sorry, that bothers me about as much as the comment made back in 1987 when I was a senior at West High School. When the folks back then pushing for a high school, one of them was quoted in the local newspaper saying, "Our children need no longer associate with that West Side element." That was a year where fully half the kids who graduated in the top 10 were from my side of town.
Manchester.
And, you know, things like that, they stick with you because...
Yeah, they do. Of course they do.
It's not only an insult to who you are or where you came from, it's an insult to your judgment as a human being that you would decide to stay there, and if it needed help, and every community does, you would try to make it better.
Well, that's what I would think.
So,
and you know, you said maybe she got more mature. Well, I mean, I guess my problem
or
is,
less selfish, one of the two.
Well, I
or
don't
both,
know. I mean,
hopefully.
my problem is she ran for state rep, probably doesn't even know where every hearing room is in the State House yet, because she's only been in office a couple of weeks, and now all of a sudden wants to have a major say in running our town that she's only been in for a very short time. And I personally have a serious problem with that. And my thinking is, in fact, I've already asked council and the town manager that if she were to pull out of the race, or, you know, she would still be elected because her name is on the ballot,
Well, maybe
and then she would have to officially resign.
Can you do write-ins in this town?
You can, but I don't know that anybody would muster up a campaign.
No.
But what would happen is that the council would get to appoint somebody. And actually, that might turn out better, because that's happened before. And every time, seriously, every time that they did have to appoint somebody for some reason or another, there were more candidates who would apply than candidates who would put their name on the ballot. So, you know, we might even have a few good people throw their names
never
in.
know.
But I just think it's plain wrong. And I don't really care if anybody likes my opinion or not. I still intend to voice it.
Well, again, you know, and I'm not here to tell anybody how to live their life, but my first and foremost consideration would be, how much of a mom am I going to be to my two young children?
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's an issue as
you
well.
know, helping the husband with the business. Maybe I'm still doing some legal work, which I tend to doubt.
I think
Also
that's
being
an
a
issue
stat
as
rep,
well.
also being a town councilor, and you know, I've lived that. My wife and I have not always lived the most opulent lifestyle because of the decisions we've
of
made.
course.
But we
Of
put our
course.
kids first,
Yep.
and I think that's what
I
most people.
I agree with you there.
Yeah.
And as I said, we'll both come under fire for that.
If-
Well,
if
we are
nothing else.
almost out of time, and I want you to be able to tell everybody the impact that your show has had in the service it's performing. And if you happen to have a second left over and you want to tell us who your personal hero is, throw that in too.
My personal hero.
Go for it. We don't have much time.
Oh.
But you're good at that. You're used to short time frames on the radio.
I think the impact of the show can be seen in what happened just in the last week or two. You know, we created the show with the idea that local people were interested in knowing what was happening in their own backyard. That's our motto. News from our own backyard, because our mission is to connect local people, places, and things. And in 1 week, we heard from people in Goffstown who were outraged at what someone else in Goffstown said on the show and agreed to come on a debate. The great budget battle between John Burt and Elizabeth DeBrule.
Yeah, I heard some of that. Yeah.
on the town's budget committee.
Yep.
We have a former school board member from Litchfield coming on the show because he doesn't like how the school board is representing what their budget committee said. There's a story that we're trying to get out of Derry that was brought to our attention about the town school board getting in trouble using taxpayer funds to promote one side of a warrant article but not another. We have a Hooksett school board candidate coming on the show. We had another listener-inspired story come out of Goffstown where we were the ones who made it public that Superintendent Stacy Buckley is looking for pastures elsewhere. This is the second time in 2 years that she's looking to get out of Goffstown.
Yeah.
We think we're probably part of the reason why. But you know, and there were a couple other stories. We had what happened to Warrant Article 10
Yes,
here,
you did.
sponsored by Richard Evans.
Yeah.
And all of this is not something that we went out and found. All of this is coming to us from people who listen to the show. And so I think word is out there, for lack of a better term, that people looking to get attention on local candidates, local issues, local goofiness. And let me tell you something, the more I see what happens in the towns surrounding Manchester, the more I'm convinced, for those of you who like to pick on my city, the more I'm convinced that Manchester is the same one of a group. Really, I mean, some of the stuff that happens in these towns, you can't make it up.
Crazy, yeah.
So it's at least every bit as bad as Manchester, but Manchester being the hub and affecting more people is always going to get,
of course,
that publicity.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the impact of our show has been to give local people voice on local issues and know that they can be heard. And I could point to things that I think we've affected a dialogue here in Bedford on a couple of issues. We've certainly affected Goffstown and Manchester on a couple of issues. We had an impact on a couple things in Hooksett. I could go back and say, well, because of this, this happened. Because of that, that happened. And almost all of it was generated by what listeners brought to us, not that we decided to get involved in something. Not we said, we're going to make a change over here, this is part of my agenda, and therefore ... It didn't happen that way. And so I think what our adorable little radio show, as we like to refer to it.
With adorable little, you know.
Yeah, a super secret broadcast location above Jacques' Flower Shop on Mass Road in scenic Pinardville. Haven't said that 100 times. I think what we've been able to do is prove that local people are seriously interested in local content and are responsive to the medium that give them that content. And I think that's what our impact has been. And I'm not joking when I say that it is now beyond my capacity to handle all of the email, for example, that I get hit with on a daily basis as a result of that show.
Yeah. I don't know how you keep your head above water. I really don't.
Well, sometimes I drown. It's just nobody notices. Personal hero, because I never leave any question unanswered. I think I can break it into a variety of categories. I'm a practicing Catholic, and while I fall far short of the standard, certainly I look to Christ for guidance, and sometimes wonder sometimes I just shake my head and say, "You sure about this?" I take my faith very seriously. Personal hero would have to be my mom and dad. You know, a teacher and a bartender.
Very nice.
Sent me to Boston College, my sisters to Colby and Georgetown, my brother to Syracuse. Just good old-fashioned, hard-working, you know, folks who I like to think gave us some decent values. Political hero, I would have to say I'm a Ronald Reagan fan. You know, Reagan showed what conviction can, in a place where everyone's looking to wobble and be moderate and try to capture people by being weak. Reagan still stands as an example of how being strong attracts people to your point of view, how making the argument is to not always win the argument, but certainly not to always lose it. Or if you don't make the argument, you lose. I think the failure of, you know, Ovid Lamontagne and Frank Ginta and Mitt Romney were the arguments they weren't willing to make. And the positions they weren't willing to stand for, whether people disagreed with them or not. So from his position, from a position of principle, and being willing to have the courage of his convictions and inspire people to think differently, although they may not agree, I'd say politically it's probably Ronald Reagan.
Well, we are out of time. And
Kathy, thank you.
I am going to thank you so much for being here. I'm going to
Appreciate the
tell
invitation.
people
This was
thanks
fun.
for watching and to keep telling it like it is, but I want
Thanks for
you
tuning in.
to use your closing.
My
Go
closing.
for it. Do it.
All right. Well, we want to thanks to the entire team here at Kathy Benuck Productions, and thanks to you for being out there. We're proud to have you in the audience. Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.